Statements by members. The Honourable Member for Aurora Oak Ridges.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As Islamic History Month comes to an end, I've been reflecting on it and indeed on history in general. My recent meetings with the Ismaili community at the Aga Khan Museum and Islamic Center allowed me to see firsthand the artistic, intellectual, and scientific contributions of Islamic civilization throughout history. The celebration I joined with the Dawoodi Bohra community in our area also highlighted the overall human progress this Muslim community has made. Islamic history is rich and varied, like the histories of all faiths, cultures, and peoples. The brilliance and creativity of all beings create this history. At times, it is for the common good, and at other times, it is not. Because as humans, we are both amazing and flawed. As we write this next chapter of our history and histories, I pray that we will all join hands and work for the common good. Let us show that we have learned from the past and evolved. And as Canadians, we must reach out to one another with understanding and acceptance to ensure that our actions create a chapter that we can all be proud of. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Chatham-Kent.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today on a literal life and death matter for millions of Canadians: reliable and affordable cellular service. Recently, a rural Leamington resident had to race several kilometers to get enough cellular signal strength to call the fire department. A Chatham resident's medic alert monitoring calls for his diabetic father keep failing because of no service. The survival of remote communities, such as Pelee Island, are dependent upon reliable service to face the dangers of weather, fire, lake flooding, health services, and so much more. After 8 years, why does this broken Liberal NDP government provide rural Ontario with the second worst and costliest cellular service in the world? The CRTC needs to immediately review the integrity of Canada's cellular infrastructure and report to the House by the end of February 2024. Instead of drop signals, Canadians would do better to drop this government, since they are not worth the cost.
Thank the Honourable Member, and I'd also like to apologise for not getting his riding correct. It was Chatham-Kent Leamington. The Honourable Member from Nepean.
Mr. Speaker, a very successful technology entrepreneur, Mark Andreessen, recently published a Techno-Optimist Manifesto, which I believe every policymaker should read. He's the same person who wrote Why Software is Eating the World in 2011, where he foresaw the digital disruption that has since unfolded, underscoring the significance of software in redefining industries and shaping contemporary business landscape. In the manifesto, he says there is no material problem, whether created by nature or by technology, that cannot be solved with more technology. Our civilization was built on a spirit of discovery, of exploration, of industrialization. He concludes with, we owe the past and the future. It is time, once again, to raise the technology flag. It is time to be techno-optimists. It is time to build. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Bécancour, Nicolet Sorel. Mr. Speaker, Hélène El Hari, Bloc Québécois Member of Parliament for Louis Hébert from 1997 to 2000, passed away last week. She never raised her voice. She had laughter and smiles on her face. Hélène El Hari was a quiet force and a pioneer. She was the first woman agronomist in Quebec. At a time when the pesticide industry was booming, she was looking for a more respectful form of agriculture that better respected the Quebec land that she loved so much. As a Member of Parliament, she spearheaded the debate on genetically modified organisms and tabled a bill on compulsory labeling of GMOs at a time when no one had even heard of them. As Vice President of the Bloc Québécois from 2001 to 2007, she reminded us of the importance of Quebec's regions. Then, as a retiree, she became involved in the Scottish independence movement, whose similarities with Quebec were clear to her. On behalf of the Bloc Québécois, thank you, Hélène El Hari, and we extend our heartfelt condolences to her family and to all those who had the opportunity to work with this exceptional woman. Our condolences, the Honourable Member for Châteauguay-Lacolle. We are confident in our future with our rich past and confidence in the present, too. We are celebrating in Châteauguay-Lacolle. The municipalities of Napierville and Saint-Cyprien are both celebrating their 200th anniversaries, and Sherrington is celebrating its 175th anniversary. These celebrations are an expression of our shared history, courage, solidarity, and cohabitation, living together. Our region is rich in agricultural land, people, and historical events that have shaped the country that we live in today. Thank you to all those who have contributed to the growth and to the prosperity of this magnificent region. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Member for Portneuf-Jacques-Cartier. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to live in one of Canada's most beautiful ridings, Portneuf-Jacques-Cartier. The region is known for the richness and beauty of its urban and rural areas, as well as its magnificent holiday resorts. The region is also known for its dynamic entrepreneurs and hard-working, involved people. I'd like to make a special mention of an essential sector that is part of our riding's DNA, agriculture and livestock production. Do you know where you can find the best dairy cow in all of North America? The best in Canada? The best in Quebec? Is she in Portneuf-Jacques-Cartier? Yes, she is. And more specifically, the best dairy cow is in Cap-Santé. On October 6th, the judges at the World Dairy Expo named Shakira, a Holstein cow from the renowned Ferme Jacobs, the best cow of 2023. Congratulations to the Jacobs family. And among the other winners, Petit Clair Lambda Annie took first place in the yearling heifer category. I'd also like to congratulate the Petit Clair family from Saint-Basile. Thank you to all of our passionate farmers. You mean a lot to us. Honourable Member from Vimy. Mr. Speaker, in these difficult times, and as Remembrance Day draws near, I would like to take this opportunity to remember October 28, 1940, and to commemorate the incredible sacrifices made by Greece, a longtime ally of Canada, during the Second World War.
28, 1940, with the Greek rejection of Mussolini's ultimatum to occupy Greece with a loud no, or όχι, the entire Greek population fought against overwhelming Italian, then German, and Bulgarian fascist and Nazi forces. They continued a courageous fight for 4 terrible years during the brutal occupation, suffering immense losses. Nous ne devrions jamais oublier.
We must never forget the Greek contribution to our ultimate victory for freedom. Their contribution far outweighed their numbers.
Vive le Canada.
Long live Canada. The Honourable Member for Whitby.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to rise in the House today to share some exciting news. The Sustainable Finance Forum 2023 will be held this week on Wednesday, November 1st and Thursday, November 2nd at the Shaw Centre here in Ottawa. In just a couple of days, we will welcome 500 participants at this year's forum to engage in many constructive conversations over 2 days. The program consists of 16 sessions showcasing the power of finance in helping build a more sustainable, just, and prosperous economy. We can leverage our markets and mobilize capital to help solve many of our greatest challenges, from affordable housing to food insecurity to climate change and much more. With many renowned speakers and thought leaders coming together, this year's forum will provide an opportunity for policymakers, innovators, financial institutions, and international experts to come together and explore ways that we can align our financial system with our values and build the economy of the future.
The Honourable Member for Tobique-Mactaquac.
Mr. Speaker, after 8 long years, Canadians can't afford any more of these NDP Liberal fairy tales. The carbon tax, with no way of measuring its effectiveness, according to the Commissioner of the Environment, is the most expensive, punitive, ineffective, and useless virtue signal in the history of Canada. Last week, the Prime Minister finally admitted that Canadians can't afford it when he announced he'd remove the carbon tax on home heating for Atlantic Canadians. But beyond the mirage of yet another false promise, in reality, this Prime Minister has committed to fully implement a quadruple carbon tax in 3 years after the next election. Mr. Speaker, this Prime Minister is just not worth the cost. I'm from Atlantic Canada, and I thought, what about the rest of the country? They can't afford it either. And how did the Liberal government respond? They suggested maybe the West should elect more Liberals. Good luck with that. Perhaps Premier Higgs from New Brunswick said it best. Just cancel this unaffordable carbon tax altogether. together. Common sense conservatives agree. In every part of the country, Canadians from sea to sea are asking, get off our backs and axe the tax!
The honourable member for Oakville North Burlington.
Earlier this month, I joined a panel in Toronto to talk about the Canadian Nuclear Isotope Council's Isotopes for Hope campaign. The updated report, which highlights the significant progress achieved in just 6 months, includes federal funding of $35 million for the Canadian Medical Isotope System, which I was proud to announce at Bruce Power in July of this year. Joining me on the panel was Saugeen Ojibwe Nation Chief Greg Najuan, who talked about how this funding will provide the community with an equity stake in the production of lutetium-177 and has led to healing with Bruce Power. Canada is a leader in medical isotope development, supply, and use, and with the global market expected to reach $33 billion in the next decade, Canada is in the unique position to participate in this growth. Thank you to James Skongag, Chair of the CNIC, for your leadership and vision, and all those working to save lives in Canada and abroad. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Beauce. Mr. Speaker, after 8 years of Bloc Liberal coalition, last Friday's announcement is a humiliation for Quebecers. The Prime Minister needs to stop ignoring Quebec and must announce the complete, not just temporary, withdrawal of the second carbon tax, a tax that adds 17 cents per litre of gas. This tax is supported by the Bloc Québécois, which proves that it costs a lot to vote Bloc. The impact of this Bloc Liberal inflationary spending is catastrophic for everyone in Canada. The proof is in the unprecedented increase in food bank use. Where I come from, in the Beauce region, there is no public transit. Parents have to use their cars to get to work, to take their children to activities, and especially to go to the grocery store in order to feed their families. 82% of food bank users are workers who can no longer make ends meet, and 35% of them are children. This Bloc Liberal coalition is completely out of touch with reality. These carbon taxes have a direct impact on Canadians' ability to feed themselves. It's time to bring back a government that will use common sense, a conservative government. The honourable member for Kenora.
After 8 years of the NDP Liberal government, even this Prime Minister is recognizing that he's not worth the cost and that his carbon tax will do nothing to help the environment. Last week, he saw the poll numbers and desperately delayed carbon tax payments on home heating in Atlantic Canada. But why not across the country? Well, the minister from Long Range Mountains admitted the exemption wasn't granted to other Canadians because they don't vote Liberal. She says if other regions want an exemption, then they should have voted for this Liberal government. Mr. Speaker, well, the people of Thunder Bay, Superior North voted for a Liberal minister, but where was their exemption? Clearly, she has been ineffective in advocating for those of us across Northern Ontario. Only common sense Conservatives have a plan to axe the tax for good and bring home lower prices. We are ready to pass legislation today, Mr. Speaker, so we can take the tax off and keep the heat on for people across Northern Ontario and right across the country.
The honourable member for Alfred Pellan. Mr. Speaker, our Canadian gymnasts performed brilliantly at the Artistic Gymnastics World Championships. René Cournoyer, Félix Dolcy, William Aymar, Jason Ramperstand, and Zachary Clay embody infinite determination, breathtaking talent, and a tenacity that takes them to the top. 3 of Laval's gymnasts, Félix, William, and Jason, accompanied by their coach Adrian Ballon, shone at the World Championships in Belgium. They achieved the extraordinary feat of qualifying the men's team for the Olympic Games in Paris in 2024. That's a feat that had not been achieved since 2008. We look forward to seeing our colors shine at the Paris Olympics. Laval Excellence's unwavering support for these athletes over the past 15 years is an immense source of pride for Alfred Pellan. Hooray for Canada and hooray for our exceptional athletes. The honourable member for Winnipeg Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I remember the story of my father, a Holocaust survivor. After arriving in Canada, he and my grandmother would hide under the table when they heard a plane because they were worried about being bombed. My grandmother and father were riddled with trauma. My grandmother as a survivor of the concentration camps, and my father as a child in hiding during the war. My father became a peace activist. In fact, he lost a teaching job in the 60s after he refused to take off his peace button. I think of the families and children in Gaza right now who will lose their whole family as a result of war, and the Israeli children being held hostage who will live with similar trauma as my grandmother and father. I know if my dad and grandmother were alive, they would be calling for an immediate ceasefire. They would not want anyone to endure what they had to in life. In honor of my father, Albert Gazan, and my grandmother, Gina Gazan, I call for a ceasefire now, the release of all hostages, and not to disrespect their legacies as Holocaust survivors to justify ethnic cleansing, not in their names. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Thérèse de Blainville. Mr. Speaker, from October 30th to November 3rd, the Mouvement Autonome et Solidaire des Sans-Emploi is organizing National Unemployment Week. I would like to applaud this initiative, in which a number of groups defending the rights of the unemployed in several regions of Quebec are mobilizing to remind the Liberal government of its many broken promises to reform the employment insurance system. The new employment minister recently said that they wanted a strong program. Well, there's only one thing to do then, and that's to thoroughly reform the current unfair employment insurance system. The Bloc Québécois is calling for this reform. The Bloc has been working hard on this for years and will continue to do so. In these times of economic uncertainty, the need for reform is more apparent than ever. This is more than necessary, Mr. Speaker. In fact, it's urgent. We stand in solidarity. Happy National Unemployment Week. The honourable member for Stormont, Dundas, South Glengarry.
Mr. Speaker, the saying goes, desperate people do desperate things. And after 8 years, this is exactly what we saw from the Prime Minister last week with his last-minute desperate announcement on the carbon tax. In a typical Liberal fashion, his own minister admitted the exemption wasn't granted to all Canadians across the country because they didn't vote Liberal. Well, it begs the question, just how ineffective and out of touch are the Liberal MPs in Nickel Belt, Sudbury, North Bay, and Thunder Bay that they couldn't get the same deal back home? Winters are pretty cold in Northern Ontario too, and they should be treated the same as everybody else. Here's our common sense Conservative plan. Take the carbon tax off all home heating for all Canadians. And let's be clear, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister did not try this because Canadians are hurting. He only did this because he is hurting. After 8 years, Mr. Speaker, Canadians know he's just not worth the cause, and now with his latest plan, even he knows it too.
The honourable member for St. John's East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our price on pollution incentivizes greener choices and puts more money back in families' pockets. But we heard from many on home heating oil. While they wanted to switch, they needed more time and support, and we listened. Now, home heating oil will be exempt from the price on pollution for 3 years. We're giving free heat pumps to those below the medium income, plus $250 to sign up. We're helping to get rid of the upfront cost of heat pumps for everyone else. And we're doubling the rural top-up to 20%. The plan saves people energy, and it saves them money. Thank you.
Oral question.
The honourable member, the honourable leader of the opposition.
Mr. Speaker, after 8 years, the Prime Minister has finally admitted that he's not worth it. After how many years? Well, the carbon tax has done nothing for the environment, and it actually hampers families. Just minutes before I was going to host a big Guthrie in a Liberal riding to cut the carbon tax. The Prime Minister flip-flopped, but he didn't eliminate the second carbon tax that applies to Quebec with the support of the Bloc. Will be consistent and eliminate the second carbon tax for the Quebecers and all Canadians. The Honourable Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to remind the Leader of the Opposition that we have been consistent. But I'd also like to remind him that today, as climate change hits Canadians and people across the planet, a party that wants to be a responsible government has to take account of climate change and help with affordability. And in terms of the Conservatives, there's nothing there. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Knew that this Prime Minister was not worth the cost. We just didn't realize he would admit it himself. But here's what it took. I was moments away from holding a massive 1,000-person rally of common sense Nova Scotians to axe the tax. The Prime Minister heard the news. He was huddled up in a ball in the fetal position, sweating bullets as Liberal MPs pounded on his office door asking for some relief. But only some relief came, Mr. Speaker, not for everyone everywhere. Will I need to hold massive axe the tax rallies in every Liberal riding to finally do away with it?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This government has developed and will be rolling out a plan to deploy heat pumps, free heat pumps in Atlantic Canada and across the country. It will address affordability issues, put more money back in the pockets of Canadians, and actually help us to address climate change, something that the opposition members seem to ignore on an ongoing basis.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition
admitted that he's not worth the cost by announcing that he would pause his carbon tax for some people on some fuels for some period of time. And then his Rural Affairs Minister said that other Canadians could have had the same pause, but for the fact that they didn't elect Liberals. Apparently, we're going to have different tax rates in different constituencies depending on how people vote. Why is it, Mr. Speaker, that the Liberal MPs in Thunder Bay, North Bay, Sudbury, Sault Ste. Marie, other freezing cold communities are not getting the same break? Is it because their local Liberal MP is utterly useless?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Certainly it is very important that we are addressing both affordability concerns and fighting climate change across this country. The heat pump program, the Honourable Leader of the Opposition, if he'd done his homework, would know applies across the country. It actually will help to ensure that we are reducing the costs of home heating, oil heating in every province and territory while continuing to address climate change in a thoughtful way.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
That is hot air in cold weather. Just today, the snow started falling in cold Ottawa. Edmonton's also cold. It has Liberal MPs. Winnipeg, they call it Winterpeg for a reason. People there are forced to pay tax on natural gas. All these cities have Liberal MPs. The Prime Minister claims that he only backed down on the carbon tax for some Canadians because of the advocacy of terrified Liberal members. So is he really saying that Liberal MPs in the areas where this pause does not apply are totally useless and will never be able to defend Canadians heating their homes?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition knows that Canadians who live in jurisdictions where the price on pollution applies get over $1,000 a year from the Government of Canada to fight climate change. When it comes to the Conservatives, they want to take that $1,000 out of the pockets of Canadians, Mr. Speaker. Our climate policy has resulted in 53 megatons being removed. That's the equivalent of 11 million cars a year. Mr. Speaker, while they keep their heads in the sand and pretend that climate change isn't real, we're going to fight climate change and we're going to help Canadians with affordability. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
The Affairs Minister says that if Canadians want a pause from the carbon tax, they need to elect a local Liberal MP. She's got it exactly wrong. What they need to do is elect a common-sense Conservative government that will axe the tax entirely. This is not only hurting the pocketbook of Canadians or forcing seniors to choose between eating and heating. Now, Saskatchewan, Alberta, BC, and Ontario are asking for similar breaks. In fact, the Saskatchewan government is refusing to collect the tax on the utility. Does the Prime Minister realize that he is not only bankrupting Canadians and leaving them in the cold, he's actually dividing our country?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, look, as a resident of Ontario, I remember the last time that a province elected a common-sense Conservative government, Mr. Speaker. Look what they did to education. Look how they gutted healthcare. Look what happened with Walkerton, Mr. Speaker. We know as Canadians what happens when you elect common-sense Conservatives. They gut programs, they hurt Canadians, and they're certainly not there when it comes to fighting climate change or supporting Canadians. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Belleuil-Chambly. Mr. Speaker, literally, tens of thousands of companies say that they are in danger in the wake of the CEBA program. The pandemic hurt them, of course. Inflation is hurting them. Interest rates are hurting them. Consumer perspectives in Quebec and Canada also are hurting them. We have asked for an agreement with banks to have a credible solution for these companies. Is the government ready to take action? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, our government and all we're listening to small companies. Small businesses have asked for our help, and that is why our government has extended the deadline for CEBA until January 18th, 2024. We also announced for extension of 1 year for reimbursement until the end of 2026. Our government is always there for small businesses. The Honourable Member for Belleuil-Chambly. We're talking about real companies, real entrepreneurs, real jobs. We're talking about a real economic impact in Canada and in Quebec. Everyone in all provinces is saying that the current deadlines and delays are not enough. Companies are at the risk of closing their doors. We're just hearing fantasies here. We're talking about real jobs and real companies, and this is almost nothing. They need a hand. The Honourable Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When we're talking about CEBA in Canada, it's an account we established to help companies and organizations throughout the pandemic. We delayed the reimbursement till the end of 2023. There's a portion that is non-refundable, and then we also extended it by another couple of weeks so the companies could make some adjustments and benefit from that non-refundable portion. But we can't scare organizations and companies for nothing. The Honourable Member for Burnaby South.
On home heating only benefits Canadians that live where Liberals need to save their seats. all Canadians need some relief when it comes to the cost of home heating. That's why New Democrats propose taking the GST off of all home heating. That would help all Canadians. But it's a measure that Liberals and Conservatives have both opposed. So when will the Liberals stop playing games and bring in relief for all Canadians this cold winter?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And again, I would just say that folks in the chamber need to do their homework. This program actually applies across the country. The rebate applies, the doubling of the rural top-up applies across the country. The heat pump program applies across the country. It applies to all folks who are actually challenged by the cost right now of home heating oil.
Honourable member from Burnaby South.
Doug Ford et le Greenbelt sont l'exemple.
Doug Ford and the Greenbelt are the perfect example of the Conservative strategy on housing. They sell interest to their rich promoter friends. And the Liberals, after 8 years, have not done better. Record rent prices, rent evictions. The worst record in the G7. It benefits those who are profiting from the crisis, not those who are facing it. We need to build. What is the government doing to build not-for-profit housing? The Honourable Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to remind my honourable colleague that I am opposed to what the government was trying to do in the GTA. And the Conservatives did support this. We are in favour of environmental protection across the country. In the last month, we signed agreements with the Northwest Territories, Nunavut, and Nova Scotia to protect 1,000 square meters of territory across the country. That's 4 times the size of the Great Britain, and we still have much work to do. The Honourable Member for Thornhill.
Liberal NDP government is finally saying the quiet part out loud. They admitted that their carbon tax makes life more unaffordable and does nothing to help the environment. But only certain people get relief. Those who happen to live in places where Liberal polling numbers are the worst. Everyone else gets told that their vote doesn't matter and that they don't care. If the Liberals can take the carbon tax off for some Canadians, why can't they take it off for all Canadians?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I've said a number of times, this program applies across the country in every province and territory of this country. We have developed a solution with respect to home heating oil that will put more money back into the pockets of Canadians. It will continue to fight and reduce emissions. It will address both the climate issue and challenges with respect to affordability.
The Honourable Member from Thornhill.
The Minister can rely on his prepared talking points all he wants, but that wasn't quite how the Minister for Rural Economic Development spun it yesterday. She told Canadians that if they wanted to be exempted from Liberal carbon taxes, they had to, wait for it, vote Liberal. My neighbours in the GTA have a question then for the Minister. They have 24 Liberal MPs in Toronto, 11 in Peel, 7 in York, 10 of them are cabinet ministers. If this is the largest concentration of Liberal ridings in Canada, then why are they still paying a carbon tax?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, home heating oil is a challenge not just for Atlantic Canadians but for many in rural Canada. That has been the case for many years, but became more forceful in the last couple of years as the price of home heating oil skyrocketed, went up 75% in 2022. What I would say is we've come up with a solution that actually will enable Canadians to do the right thing with respect to fighting climate change. Will actually put more money in their pockets. It is a good solution for the climate. It is a good solution for the affordability of Canadians in Atlantic Canada and everywhere across this country.
Then I have
the honourable member for Dufferin.
Has finally admitted the carbon tax makes heating your home more expensive, and he's pausing the carbon tax in Atlantic Canada. And we know why, because the Minister for Long Range Mountains said Atlantic MPs forced the Prime Minister to do it. So actually what the Prime Minister is saying after 8 years is that if you're a Liberal MP from Brampton, Toronto, Mississauga, or Thunder Bay, your voice doesn't matter at all. You can't have any change. They are effectively useless. So will the Prime Minister stop playing politics with the carbon tax and just axe it?
Hear, hear.
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, as a Member of Parliament from Ontario, I know that Ontario families get over $1,000 a year for fighting pollution, Mr. Speaker. I guess that Ontario MP wants to take that $1,000 right out of their pockets, Mr. Speaker. That's exactly what he's advocating for. Instead, our government is committed to making sure that we help Canadians not just fight pollution, not just fight climate change, but also deal with affordability. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Then I have
the honourable member for Dufferin Caledon.
Now we've just been treated to the great carbon tax fable. First, it was revenue neutral. Second, you get more money than you pay into it. Third, it fights climate change. It does none of those things, Mr. Speaker. Right. What it does, and what the Prime Minister's admitted by pausing the carbon tax, is it makes it more expensive for everyone. The real tragedy is for MPs, is for Canadians outside of Atlantic Canada. Why? It's not being paused. And no, most people heat their homes in Ontario, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, BC, and Quebec, not with heating oil. It doesn't apply across the country. Will they stop playing politics, picking winners and looters, dividing Canadians, and axe the tax?
Colleagues, let I have minute.
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to correct a record. When we came into power in 2015, projections in emission growth in Canada were going that in 2030 we would be 80 million tons above our 2005 levels. We took that out of the atmosphere, Mr. Speaker, and we've reduced emissions by another 50 million tons. That's the equivalent of removing from our roads more than 20 million vehicles, Mr. Speaker. That's one of the things that we've done in the last 8 years. We've done so many more things to fight climate change. We have the best record of all G7 countries, something that never happened, not once, under the Conservative Party for 10 years, Mr. Speaker.
Before I give the floor to the honourable member, I'd just like to encourage all members to wait your turn to speak until you're recognized by the chair. The honourable member for Charlebourg-en-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, last Thursday, the Prime Minister looked at the polls and panicked. And what did he do? He paused the carbon tax in Atlantic Canada. And yesterday, his Environment Minister said in an interview that he wasn't even prepared to help Canadians in his own province. And this is humiliating for Quebecers who also pay the carbon tax. Quebecers also have to eat and pay for gas. Will the Prime Minister announce the complete, not just temporary, withdrawal of the second carbon tax that applies to Quebec? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, I would ask my honourable colleague to go back and listen to the show on Radio Canada, and I'm happy he does listen to it because we do fund CBC and Radio Canada. But what I said was that all the measures that we have put in place in terms of dental care, daycares, and the fight against climate change are all measures that the Conservative Party of Canada is opposed. The honourable member for Charlebourg-en-Saint-Charles. Like the tax, I didn't just listen to the show once, twice, but 3 times, and that's wrong. The minister even said that as long as he will be Minister of the Environment, he will not make any other modifications to the tax in Canada. He confirmed that there will be no changes as he's in place. So what is the Prime Minister going to do with that? But right now, the Bloc is supporting the carbon tax, and they say it doesn't apply to Quebec. And at the same time, they want to radically increase it. At the end of the day, what is this government doing? The Honourable Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think if he listened to the show once, twice, or three times, he would have practiced this question once, twice, or three times. Yes, there is a carbon price in place across the country. And yes, we make sure that there will be a mechanism that will be fair for all Canadians, and we support Canadians in the fight against climate change, and also in terms of affordability. The Honourable Member for Salaberry-sur-Roi. Mr. Speaker, the federal government cannot let 250,000 companies go bankrupt without trying to save them. Everyone is asking it to defer repayment of CEBA loans for another year without loss of the subsidy. All the premiers of Quebec and the provinces, the National Assembly of Quebec is unanimous, as is the Fédération de l'Entreprise Indépendante and the Restaurant Association. It's unanimous. Federal inaction is leading us toward a wave of bankruptcies. When will the government finally offer SMEs an adequate deferral of repayment? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, nearly 900,000 companies would have closed their doors during the pandemic. What did we do? We created the CEBA account to help small businesses stay open. And what are we doing? We're offering them additional flexibility so they can pay their loans. And what is our government continuing to do? We're continuing to help small businesses across the country and to support them, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Member for Salaberry-sur-Roi. Mr. Speaker, let's talk about federal flexibility. Companies had until December 31st to repay CEBA without losing the subsidy that saved them from bankruptcy. And do you know how much more time Ottawa gave them? 18 days. The Liberals are giving 18 days to companies that have been struggling for 3 years to pay off their pandemic debts, and they call that flexibility. Mr. Speaker, the survival of 250,000 businesses is at stake. When will we see a real deferral of payment? The Honourable Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. CEBA in Canada was offered during the COVID pandemic. We're talking about no-interest loans for a 2-year period or more, depending on the date, and with a portion that may be non-refundable if reimbursement is done before the deadline. We could also extend the deadline without having to pay back the loan at the beginning of next year. You can extend the reimbursement till the end of next year. The Honourable Member for Mirabel. Mr. Speaker, it's not true that the government is flexible. It's not true either that it's financially responsible. If it were, it would do everything to avoid the bankruptcy of 250,000 companies. If it were responsible, it would understand that companies pay back faster when they're staying alive rather than going bankrupt. And if it were responsible, they'd know that the employees of these companies are far more profitable on the job than on EI. And if they were responsible, they would defer payments again, then evaluate each company file and offer personalized solutions. That is what is financially responsible. Can they give it a try? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, we will continue to be there for small companies. We did grant small companies a prolongation of repayment until this year. When they did ask for more support, we offered them greater financing flexibility and more time with a 1-year extension of the deadline for reimbursement. Thank you.
President.
The Honourable Member for Foothills.
It must be in the air because the Prime Minister has announced his re-election campaign. Vote Liberal in 3 years. We're going to quadruple the carbon tax on home heating, gas and groceries. After 8 years, this Prime Minister is in a panic mode because he knows his NDP Liberal government isn't worth the cost. And now we have a Liberal minister from Long Range Mountains, Newfoundland, Labrador, admitting that only Canadians who vote Liberal will get an exemption from the carbon tax. Well, what about the Liberal minister from Edmonton Centre or the Liberal MP from Calgary Skyview? Were these MPs so incompetent and so out of touch they couldn't secure an exemption on the carbon tax for Albertans?
The Honourable Minister.
We know that carbon pricing works. It both reduces emissions and puts more money in the pockets of middle-class families. We made a decision to attack a highly polluting source of fuel, home heating oil, in a different way so we can get rid of it faster. Mr. Speaker, we're doing this by making a record investment in heat pump technology, which is not only going to reduce emissions at a household level, it's going to save families thousands of dollars every year. This is sensible policy. It's good for the environment, it's good for the economy, and it's good for the households, not just in my riding, but right across the country.
Hear, hear.
Then I have Deputy Foothills.
The carbon tax works only if it's politically expedient. The Prime Minister's carbon tax exemption doesn't help 97% of Canadians who are already struggling to put food on the table and heat their homes. Now we have a Liberal minister from Newfoundland, Labrador, telling Albertans that the only reason you're not getting an exemption is you didn't vote Liberal. Wow. So is the Liberal minister from Edmonton Centre and the Calgary Liberal MP from Skyview not defending Alberta families? Were they not defending their own 81% of their constituents who rely on natural gas to heat their homes will not get a carbon tax exemption? Will these Liberal MPs from Alberta stand in this House, defend their constituents, and admit their Prime Minister is not worth the cost?
Mr. Speaker, well, I guess that member didn't hear the minister earlier when he said that home heating oil was exempted right across the country. Furthermore, for his constituents in Alberta, they're getting over $1,000 a year in a climate rebate to help fight climate change. But if that member and any other member from Alberta really wants to stand up for Canadians, why don't they stand up to Premier Danielle Smith as they're trying to gut their pensions, Mr. Speaker? On this side of the House, we're going to stand for Canadians right across this country when it comes to their pensions, when it comes to affordability, and it fights to climate change. They're reckless and they're not worth the risk. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Really, I would seek the cooperation of all members, please, to keep your comments so that the Speaker can hear the questions, but also so that the person who would ask the questions can certainly hear the response. The honourable member from Peace River, Prince George, Northern Rockies.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. After 8 years, this desperate Prime Minister in total freefall finally admitted that his carbon tax is punishing Canadians. The Prime Minister also announced in his re-election platform that to vote Liberal in Yukon means quadrupling the carbon tax on home heating. And this weekend, the minister from Newfoundland admitted the exemption didn't apply to all Canadians across the country, including all Yukoners. My question is for the Liberal Member of Parliament for Yukon. Will he step up and stand up to this Prime Minister and demand that the carbon tax be permanently removed for all Yukoners?
Yeah, great job.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I've said a number of times, this program and the heat pump program actually applies in every province and territory across this country. But I would also suggest that, yes, disproportionately there are more heat pumps and more heating oil in Atlantic Canada. We actually are focused on ensuring we are addressing pressing needs in every part of the country, including providing significant funding for abandoned oil and gas wells in Alberta and British Columbia.
Then I have Deputy de Skeena Bulkley Valley.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians right across this country are struggling with the cost of home heating, and Canadians right across this country want to be part of fighting climate change. Yet, while this government sweetened the heat pump rebate for Atlantic Canada, the rest of Canadians are stuck with a lengthy bureaucratic application process that only gets them 1/3 of that dollar amount. It does seem, Mr. Speaker, like these Liberals care more about rural Canada when they hold seats there than they do about helping everyone across this country. So will the minister stand today and commit to increasing the federal heat pump rebate for all Canadians.
L'honorable ministre.
Again, Mr. Speaker, it is important that folks actually do their homework. There is an existing heat pump program across this country that provides grants of $10,000. It actually enables people to get a check within 3 days. It applies just as much in British Columbia as it does in Newfoundland and Labrador. Last week, we announced we were increasing that by another $5,000 so long as provinces actually step up to be part of the solution. So, yes, the answer is yes.
L'honorable député de Port Moody, Coquitlam.
Mr. Speaker, today Air Canada announced obscene quarterly profits of $1.2 billion. At the same time, another passenger was forced to drag themselves off an Air Canada flight because the necessary wheelchair and staff weren't in place. It's degrading and a violation of human rights. Under the Liberals' watch, Air Canada has been allowed to mistreat Canadians while making billions in profits. When is the minister going to do their job and make sure travelers with disabilities never face discrimination again?
L'honorable ministre des Transports.
Mr. Speaker, I was horrified to learn how Rodney Hodgins was treated by Air Canada. Like every Canadian, Mr. Hodgins deserves to be treated with dignity and with respect. My office called Air Canada. They're investigating. And Air Canada apologized to Mr. Hodgins. That's the very, very least they can do. Persons with disabilities deserve equal rights and access when traveling. Canadians expect Air Canada to do better, much, much better.
L'honorable député de Saint-Léonard, Saint-Michel.
Mr. Speaker, last week members of this House voted on my private member's bill C-252, which aims to prohibit the marketing of unhealthy foods and beverages to children aged 13 and under. While the Bloc and the NDP voted in favor of this initiative to protect the health of children, the Conservatives voted against it, once again demonstrating that the health of Canadians is always their last priority. To the Minister of Health, can you please speak to the importance of the Child Health Protection Act?
L'honorable ministre de la Santé.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank the member for St. Leonard, St. Michel, for championing children's health. And, you know, when we take a look at the absolute unfortunate tsunami of chronic disease and illness that is coming as a result of childhood nutrition not being where it needs to be, we know one of those leading problems is advertisers going after children to push, unfortunately, unhealthy products. They're going to have injurious effects on their health. I'm so proud of this House that we took action. I'm so proud of this member for introducing this private member's bill. I'm utterly confounded as to why the Conservatives would stand against it. It's imperative we do everything we can for children's health.
L'honorable député de Barrie-Innisfil.
An obvious, desperate Prime Minister admitted his carbon tax is punishing Canadians and making life unaffordable. After 8 years, he finally proved to himself last Thursday that he's not worth the cost. And his only strategy at this point is not about climate, it's about protecting his Liberal MPs. In Sudbury-Nickel Belt, 55% of homes are heated by natural gas, yet for these struggling Canadians, they get no exemption from heating their homes. Now, the Leader of the Opposition has proposed to axe the tax in all forms of home heating for every Canadian. Will the Prime Minister agree with that?
L'honorable ministre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Earlier, I spoke about our record in terms of greenhouse gas reduction, which, no thanks to the Conservative Party, we've been able to do, Mr. Speaker, over the last few years. But let's talk about the record level number of electric vehicles that are being deployed. 10% of sales now in Canada are electric vehicles, something the Leader of the Opposition doesn't even believe in. He thinks it's a myth. Whereas 10 years ago, 1 in 25 vehicles sold in the world was electric. Today, it's 1 in 5 around the world, Mr. Speaker. We're catching up to the rest of the world, no thanks to the Conservative Party of Canada.
L'honorable député de Renfrew-Nipissing, Pembroke.
Mr. Speaker, after 8 long years, this NDP Liberal government is so arrogant that it doesn't even try to hide its corruption. The Minister for Long Range Mountain openly admitted that Canadians who don't vote for Liberals will be punished with higher taxes. She insulted Canadians and gave a slap in the face to her coalition partners. What about the NDP MP for Timmins James Bay? Can the minister tell us why the NDP partners are so incompetent and ineffective they couldn't get a tax break on home heating for people suffering in Northern Ontario?
L'honorable ministre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is important to address affordability. That is exactly what we are doing with the heat pump program, to ensure that people are actually saving money. It's also important that we actually are fighting climate change in a thoughtful and substantive way. I do find this question a little bit odd coming from the only member in the House of Commons who voted against the Paris Agreement.
Certain members would like to listen to the question which is being asked by the honourable member. If I could ask for your attention, the honourable member from Renfrew and Nipissing, Pembroke.
And Mr. Speaker, this Prime Minister once said a Canadian is a Canadian is a Canadian. After 8 long years, now he says some Canadians are more equal than other Canadians. The NDP Liberal government is so desperate to cling on to power, they will pay any price. This Prime Minister is not worth the cost of national unity. Will the Liberals introduce legislation today, listening to the Leader of the Opposition, and axe the tax on all home heating for all Canadians?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm not sure how many times I need to repeat in this House that the program applies to all Canadians, all provinces and territories across the country. We are addressing a particularly acute issue with respect to home heating. Most folks in this chamber should be aware that this has been an issue for a number of years. We are doing that by accelerating the deployment of heat pumps that will save people money and will continue to help us to address climate change. That is a responsible, thoughtful way to approach public policy.
The honourable member from Dauphin Swan River, Neepawa.
Mr. Speaker, after 8 years, this Prime Minister is not worth the cost. The Prime Minister finally admitted that his carbon tax is unaffordable for Canadians. But instead of removing the carbon tax for all Canadians, the Prime Minister chose to further divide this country by only helping those who voted for him. The Liberals are saying the Manitobans didn't deserve the tax relief because they didn't vote Liberal. Unfortunately, Manitoba elected 4 Liberals. Why did the Manitoba Liberal minister from St. Boniface, St. Vital fail to get a carbon tax exemption on home heating for Manitoba?
L'honorable ministre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, again, the member opposite clearly wasn't listening to the minister when he said that home heating oil exemptions apply right across the country. But, Mr. Speaker, what's more is that folks in Manitoba get a rebate from the price on pollution. So not only are we helping Canadians to fight climate change, which I remind my colleagues is an existential threat to our well-being, we are also helping them with the high cost of living. So instead of taking their money away, Mr. Speaker, they should be joining us in ensuring that we can all provide more supports to Canadians. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Berthier-Masquis-Langeais. Mr. Speaker, our farmers continue to suffer from the catastrophic weather in July. In a survey, the UPA revealed that the rains had ravaged no less than 60% of Quebec's market garden acreage. Respondents lost a third of their turnover in the midst of an inflation crisis. Worse still, more than half of producers believe that this damage will also have an impact on the harvest of 2024. Mr. Speaker, what is needed is 1, emergency aid for horticultural producers, and 2, a 1-year postponement of the repayment of the emergency account. When is the government finally going to act? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Mr. Speaker, Our thoughts are for all those in this country that have been affected by catastrophic weather, forest fires, for example. Producers and farmers are on the front line against climate change. We know that devastation imposed by extreme weather events and forest fires throughout the country have made these times very difficult for many of these people, and we will continue to be here for them. We'll continue to work together so that we can make sure that we meet their needs. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Member for Berthier-Masquinongé. Mr. Speaker, the Minister doesn't seem to understand the urgency of the situation. Among root vegetable growers, 64% of land has been ravaged by rain. For strawberries and raspberries, the figure is 73%. For pea growers, it's 88%. That, Mr. Speaker, will have an impact on food prices if the government does not intervene. Everyone is affected by this. Mr. Speaker, we need emergency aid. We need a one-year postponement of the repayment of the emergency account. And we're also running out of time. When will the Minister finally understand? The Honourable Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to remind my colleague that we unveiled our first national strategy to fight climate change. A strategy that was positively sanctioned by government officers, said it was brave and courageous. We are working with farmers and producers and other partners, provinces, territories and municipalities, for example, to prepare Canada and its population and its businesses to face climate change. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Member for Bellechasse-les-Échemins-Lévis. Mr. Speaker, Quebec has been hit by the second carbon tax, and the consequences for the lives of our fellow citizens are catastrophic. Our food banks are overwhelmed, like Frigo Plein, Le Grenier, and L'Essentiel in my riding. 1 in 10 people use food counters and food banks. After 8 years of this government, helped by the Bloc Québécois, nothing works anymore. It costs a lot to vote Bloc. Friday's announcement by the Prime Minister is not enough. He must abolish all taxes everywhere. When will the Prime Minister finally announce his complete withdrawal of this carbon tax? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, it's always rather difficult for me to stand up after this member because for many years she was part of the first North American government that put a price on carbon. She was part of the government at the time. I would like to quote an article from La Presse this morning. In Quebec, 265 millimetres of precipitation fell, a record that had never been seen since 1940. The impact of climate change exists, especially in agriculture. It increases the cost of food. In agriculture in Quebec, $150,000 million of damages. Everyone pays for this, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Member for Bellechasse-les-Échemins-Lévis. Mr. Speaker, after 8 years of this Bloc Québécois-supported government, parents are simply fed up. They have to cut back on absolutely everything, including their own children's needs. I don't understand why they're laughing on the other side, because there's nothing funny in what I'm saying. One family in Lévis says they have to pay almost twice as much for food because of inflation. It's expensive to vote for the Bloc Québécois, which wants to radically increase the carbon tax. The second carbon tax is being applied in Quebec and is hurting everyone. When will the Prime Minister finally abandon his carbon tax from coast to coast to coast, Mr. Speaker? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, I find it hard to follow the logic of my Conservative colleague because she was there at the time when carbon pricing was initiated. She voted for it. She was part of the cabinet. So my question to my colleague is, does she just change her mind every time she changes leader or every time she changes party? We would love to hear the next question. I would like to encourage all members to listen to the Honourable Member Louis Saint-Laurent with his question. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You'll note that the Bloc Québécois supported the Liberals once again. Mr. Speaker, close to 900,000 Quebecers go to food banks now. After 8 years of Liberal governance, that is the situation. What they want to do is create a new tax with the enthusiastic support of the Bloc Québécois, who want to radically increase the price of carbon. The Prime Minister, who is flailing in polls, says that he will give a temporary tax break for people in the Atlantic provinces. What about the rest of the country, Mr. Speaker? The Honourable Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to tell my colleagues that there is a price on pollution. Pollution is expensive. The measures we have implemented, Mr. Speaker, will allow us to improve and accelerate our fight against climate change. We have tangible projects put forward to bring money back into the pockets of our taxpayers. Our plan is flexible, contrary to what the Conservatives have to say. They should be ashamed of their desire to pollute even more. The Honourable Member for Pontiac. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Before becoming a Member of Parliament, I had the opportunity to travel to several countries without a functioning tax system. Seniors, youth, unemployed people who are just left to fend for themselves. I saw them in the street, Mr. Speaker. I know that Conservatives would love to axe our tax system, but we won't step down, we won't back down. How does the CRA help countries develop their tax systems rather than axe tax systems like the Conservatives would like to do? The Honourable Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The CRA shares its expertise and savoir-faire with many countries and developing countries in various ways. We support tax inspectors by providing experienced tax auditors. We welcome technical delegations who visit us, and we take part in 2 OECD forums. The Commissioner presides over one of these forums. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
L'honorable député de South Shore St. Margaret's.
After 8 years, the plummeting, panicking Prime Minister admitted his carbon tax is punishing Canadians and making life more unaffordable. Liberals just announced their re-election platform, Vote Liberal, and quadruple the carbon tax on home heating oil after the next election. The Liberal minister from Newfoundland admitted this exemption wasn't granted to Canadians across the country because they don't vote Liberal. Rum bottle politics is back. When will the Prime Minister stop with the Band-Aids and cure the problem he caused and axe the carbon tax?
Hear, hear. Hear.
L'honorable Ministre.
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member asked us to cure the problem. The problem that we're trying to cure is pollution from home heating oil. Mr. Speaker, by making the investments necessary, we can replace home heating oil furnaces with heat pumps. They are cleaner, they create jobs in our communities, and they save thousands of dollars every year for families who live in my community and his. That member has described on this chamber's floor before heat pumps as fairy tale programs. Mr. Speaker, people who live in our communities are going to save $1,000. That's no fairy tale.
Hear, hear. L'honorable député de South Shore St. Margaret's.
Well, heat pumps increase the coal demanded for electricity in Nova Scotia, but NDP Liberals have brought back that rum bottle politics. Vote Liberal, get a free quart of rum, or vote and get a free heat pump. But here's the catch. Liberals promised to quadruple the carbon tax after the next election. Nova Scotians aren't fooled by this bait and switch. This Prime Minister is not worth the cost. When will the Prime Minister stop with his Band-Aids and cure the problem that he caused, which is the carbon tax, and axe it?
L'honorable Ministre.
Mr. Speaker, with great respect to my honourable colleague, I think he has missed the point of this program entirely. He's concerned that people will pay a higher price after the pause has ended and the price comes back into effect. If people install a heat pump, they won't pay it at all, and that is the point. Mr. Speaker, we are making the investments necessary so people can replace a more polluting system with a less polluting system. And since he's mentioned coal, we're working to eliminate that from the grid in Nova Scotia too, which is going to help people in both of our communities.
L'honorable député de Coast of Bays Central, Notre-Dame.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Folks back home are wondering how much tax they'll pay if they vote Liberal in the next election. The Liberal MP for Long Range suggested that they want to be a government that listens to the concerns of Liberal ridings. Her and her costly colleagues voted 24 times to increase the carbon tax to 61 cents per litre. After 8 years, this NDP Liberal government and this Prime Minister is not worth the cost. Will they stop the mass confusion and tell Atlantic Canadians how much carbon tax they'll pay if they vote Liberal in the next election?
The Honourable Minister.
I think, Mr. Speaker, you could say it for the fifth time, and I don't think the answer will get across. The bottom line is, Mr. Speaker, we on this side of the House tried to find a way to make sure that people square affordability with wanting to fight climate change. Both are very important right now. Both are very important to people in Atlantic Canada, very important in my constituency. And I think that we have found a way to do that, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
L'honorable député de Bonavista Buren Trinity.
Mr. Speaker, homelessness is on the rise across the country. Sadly, this is a reality facing too many veterans who have bravely served our country. Everyone deserves to have a safe and affordable home. It is vitally important that we do everything in our power to help our homeless veterans. Can the Minister of Veterans Affairs tell us what action the government is taking on this crucial issue? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I first of all want to thank my friend and colleague for this very important question. The health and safety and well-being of our veterans is my top priority. We take the situation very seriously, and that's why our government is investing in a new program to combat homelessness when it comes to veterans. This program will provide rent supplement, support services, as well as important research to really determine what the reasons why veterans are homeless. Canada's veterans have been there for our country, and Mr. Speaker, we have to be there for them, and we will. Thank you.
The Honourable Member from Edmonton Strathcona.
Mr. Speaker, as grocery prices continue to be sky high, 1,500 students, faculty, staff, and alumni are relying on the campus food bank every week at the University of Alberta. The demand has quadrupled over the past 2 years. The Liberals are nicely asking CEOs to lower the prices, and that obviously isn't working. The Conservatives are fine with those CEOs getting richer while students and workers are forced to turn to food banks. Why won't the Liberals tackle corporate greed so that students and workers can afford to eat? Or does this government only believe Canadians who vote for them deserve to eat?
L'honorable secrétaire parlementaire.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We know that at a time when Canadians are struggling with affordability, that food prices are too high, and that's what we've heard right across this country. That's why our government called the 5 largest grocery chain CEOs to Ottawa and worked with them to create action plans that they're implementing to lower and stabilize food prices for Canadians. This is important work. We're tracking their progress, and we'll have more to report soon, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Richmond Athabasca. Mr. Speaker, every time we ask questions about the Governor-General's indecent spending, the government gets a little offended. They pay lip service, but nothing is done to change the culture of this institution. The Governor-General spends thousands on meals, alcoholic beverages, luxury hotels, trips, cleaning services, just to name a few. Imagine on a single plane trip, she even spent nearly $1,000 on slices of lime and lemon. You couldn't make this up. So I repeat my question to the government. Does the government intend to cut its $33 million budget because clearly it doesn't seem to be able to manage taxpayers' money seriously and responsibly? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, the Governor-General does important work for Canada here and throughout the world. And of course, we expect all public office holders to spend every dollar with respect, with rigour, and in a conscientious way, respecting all Canadians. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Et malheureusement, ça nous mène à la fin du...
Unfortunately, that concludes and brings us to the end of our question period. I see that we have a few points of order. The member for Regina Capel has the floor.
Government's massive and embarrassing about-face last week, I would like to seek unanimous consent for the following motion. That in order to support all Canadians struggling with the cost of living, particularly with winter fast...
So, I hate to interrupt the honourable member from Regina Capel. Unfortunately, I'm hearing no's already, which are being offered. I'm going to recognize another point of order, but I would ask all members for your cooperation first. Please, if you are seeking unanimous consent, I do ask that you do negotiate a unanimous consent so that we can continue and use up the time of the House efficiently. Je reconnais.
And now, another point of order. The member for Abitibi, Nunavik, Bay James, EU. Mr. Speaker, there has been consultation among the parties, and I believe that if you seek it, you will find unanimous consent for the following motion: that the House take note that 872,000 Quebecers used food aid in 2023, and that 2 million Canadians, including 640,000 children, also used a food bank in March 2023 alone. That the House take note that 71% of organizations working for food security in Quebec ran out of food in 2023, and that the House call on the government to do more to fight food insecurity while respecting the jurisdictions of Quebec and of the provinces. Will all those opposed to what the honourable member is moving will please say nay?
D'accord. La Chambre a entendu.
The House has heard the motion. Will all those opposed to the motion please say nay?
Adopté.
Carried.
Un autre appel au règlement.
Another point of order. The honourable member for Elmwood Transcona.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The rule book governing the procedures of this House is very clear in Chapter 11 that it's always been a fundamental rule of questioning ministers that the subject matter of the question must fall within the collective responsibility of the government or the individual responsibility of one of its ministers. This is the only basis upon which ministers can be expected to answer questions. Now, earlier in question period, the member for Renfrew, Nipissing, Pembroke asked a question regarding the conduct of the member for Timmins, James Bay, who was an NDP member and not a member of the government. So there's a couple of things that I think bear hearing out on this point, Mr. Speaker. The first is that as per the rule that I just cited, so this is not debate, this is an issue that pertains to the rules around question period, which I would note Conservatives just not that long ago actually attacked you, Mr. Speaker, over to say that the sanctity of question period is supreme. Presumably then, they would also be concerned to treat the rules of question period with the respect that something with that level of sanctity deserves. The rule, and in fact, Mr. Speaker, it wasn't that long ago that we had a similar question directed to the government about a position of the NDP, and you rightly ruled that nobody was to answer that question because it wasn't a question about a government policy. So that's the issue that has to do with the rule, but I think this is also the product of a long-standing phrase that has been allowed to be used in this place that is misleading. And it's misleading for anyone who understands the Westminster parliamentary democratic system that a confidence and supply agreement or another party sometimes voting with the government does not make that party part of a government. It is not a coalition. And I submit to you, Mr. Speaker, that the casual abuse of that misleading phrase in this place is now leading to members disregarding some of our important rules about question period and leading to disorder in the House. So I would also beseech you to consider the use of that phrase in this House, which is false, and to perhaps come back with a decision on that.
I believe I'll be able to make a ruling on that immediately, but I understand that there are two other members who seek the attention of the chair and of this House. The honourable member from Regina Capel.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And first of all, let me just say at the outset that I completely understand how devastatingly embarrassing it is for that member to be lumped in with the scandals and corruption of this Liberal government. But that's not our problem, Mr. Speaker, because it was his caucus that decided to enter into a formal agreement with the government. Now, there are many ways you could call that. One of them is a coalition. Now, if he doesn't like the fact that it's a big C coalition, we can say we're using the small C coalition term for that. But the fact of the matter is, they entered into this decision. They pledged to their Liberal partners that they would prop up this government no matter what. And they've been doing it. So while he's hearing complaints from his constituents, I would suggest rather than getting up in the House of Commons raising spurious points of orders, he should talk to his leader and pull out of this costly coalition, Mr. Speaker.
On the same point of order, I imagine it's the member from Kingston and the Islands. I would ask him to make sure that it is a point of order that can contribute to this debate.
Notwithstanding the fact that the preceding intervention had absolutely nothing to do with the point of order, mine will. I would also draw to your attention, Mr. Speaker, that during question period, there was also a question that was asked of the member from Yukon. The member from Yukon is not a member of cabinet. The questions, and I support the intervention by my NDP colleague, questions are supposed to be of the government regarding government business, and we're starting to see a trend away from that. So I really hope that you can intervene, Mr. Speaker, and I seek clarification.
I thank all members for your contributions to this point of order. I'd like to thank the member from Elmwood Transcona for raising the important point and the appropriate point of order. However, the question that was asked, and I'm going to also offer a bit of a distinction for the issue that was raised by the member of Kingston and the Islands, but for the member of Elmwood Transcona, the member from Renfrew, Nipissing, Pembroke did raise a question, did make reference to a third party. This often happens in questions or even in answers from honourable members. It's something that I would consider fair game. In the end, when the member actually got to the point of her intervention during oral questions, the question that she did ask was relevant to the affairs of the government, and therefore that's the reason why I let the question stand. With regard to the issue that the member from Kingston and the Island raises, again, a fair point that the member had raised, that the question was asked for a member who is not a member of the government, strictly speaking, nor a parliamentary secretary. Nonetheless, a minister did stand, and I can't remember which minister it was, but the minister did stand in his or her place to answer that question, and therefore, if the minister chooses to respond to that question, then I would let that happen. As you know, in a previous ruling from this chair, from this speaker, there was a question that was once asked that was not of government business. No one stood to answer it, and therefore I moved on to the next question. So let us continue in this. This gives me a great opportunity to remind all members on all sides of the House that perhaps the most effective questions and the most effective answers are the ones which are asked directly and which are responded to directly. I thank all members for their attention. Affaire courante.
Routine proceedings.
Courante ordinaire. Dépôt de
Tabling of documents.
Dépôt de projet de loi.
Introduction of government bills.
Déclaration.
Statements by ministers.